Hello and welcome to the show. I have a very special guest with me today, Jimmy Vallee. If you've been in the XRP community for more than 5 minutes, you absolutely know who he is. He's kind of created a lot of fun and excitement with his XRP buyback theory or proposal. And he's also a very accomplished securities attorney and experience in the investment world. So I have quite a few questions that I'm going to ask him today about a variety of different things. So Jimmy, nice to see you and thanks for coming by.
Nice to see you, Molly. Thank you for having me.
So one of the topics that I wanted to talk to you about today, just a couple of things, is about a paper that you published this summer on asset-backed digital currencies. You like to call them ABDC, ABC?
Right. Okay. ABDCs.
ABDCs. Yep. It's quite a long tongue twister.
Kind of like the rock band.
So what does that mean? How is that different than our current digital money?
Excellent question. So our current digital money is basically a digital representation of the fiat money that we have in circulation right now. Fiat means it's declared by order or by regulation. So there's effectively no intrinsic value to the money when you talk about the US dollar, and all countries have some form of fiat currency now. We're in a fiat system. There is no intrinsic value to that paper. It's worth probably less than 2 cents, the actual physical representation of it, but it's the full faith and credit of the United States that's backing that, right? It's basically us, the citizens of the United States, in our support and pledge to provide our labor and credit and taxes into that system that provides the value that supports the US dollar. Whereas an asset-backed currency, let's talk about that first and compare that to a fiat currency, is kind of what we used to have pre-1971. Where you could actually take in a dollar and actually pull, some amount of gold that was backing that dollar. This is, if you go back to the origins of money, it begins in exactly this way. It was gold being stored with certain persons that were the gold storage providers. They would give you a receipt, and that receipt was your claim to get the gold that you had basically put in storage there. Those receipts then started being traded among people for various goods and services, and our financial system basically grew out of that old kind of merchant system. So it's kind of an asset-backed currency is something that actually has a claim on an asset behind it. Gold, oil, natural gas, there could be a few different things. Okay. And then the digital is just a digital version of that. So imagine that the digital receipt, instead of being a paper receipt, it's in digital form. It's cryptographically secured on a blockchain such that you've eliminated the double spending problem. So it's not copyable and being able to be spent over and over again. And that's basically what an asset-backed digital currency, or ABDC, would be.
Now, this is different than a pure gold standard because there's a variety of assets that could be used to back money. Now, who decides what that list of assets is? Because if it's many things, that could become quite subjective, right? We could be arguing about what I think is of value, and you might have a different opinion on that.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. I believe that these things of value that would go into supporting a new asset-backed digital currency system would be things that are precious and non-renewable. So things like gold, silver, maybe some of the metals that are being used in computers and battery, lithium, cobalt. Things like that might also be deemed to be, significantly valuable to us. Things like oil and natural gas. But I think it would be hard for agricultural products. I think you would mentioned in an email. What about acorns? Could that be something of value? Paper's a renewable resource, right? So these things probably wouldn't be agreed by the major market participants to be something that could support or that they would recognize as being of significant, substantial value to support trading in that currency.
Well, we've certainly seen over decades that energy is considered a valuable resource, and oil could be one of these resources that is used to back a currency. Well, how does it work though if I create a currency and I back it with oil, but then I use the oil for something?
Yeah, good question. You're basically then getting us back to what the fiat problem is. So I think you're going to have some type of programmatic auditing of what's there to make sure that the amount of gold or the amount of oil in reserves. The paper that you referred to, we were using in the African country their in-place gold reserves to support their asset-backed digital currencies. So there would need to be periodic audits and then clearing of the physical commodities from time to time. Now, since you've got the digital currencies and those things are cryptographically secured with serial numbers and things like that attach to real physical commodities in storage or in place. I think you wouldn't have to do that kind of like every day. So I think that's what took us away from the gold standard before, was that there's a major transportability problem with using physical commodities, notably gold. It's super heavy, and being able to transport and clear that either across oceans or send it in the air in military aircraft. So you could use, in the interim periods, you could be using the asset-backed digital currencies to trade back and forth, and that was kind of your inventory representation of where you were. But yeah, I think from time to time, maybe once a year, maybe once a quarter, you would start to have true ups between the major market participants, the ones who are truly underwriting these currencies.
Because we had a gold standard in the past, as you obviously know, but it seems like there's a big temptation for governments to push that line and issue more currency than exists in assets. Is kind of what got the US into trouble in the 60s and the early 70s, was this overspending problem. So governments, though, they like this ability to print money out of nothing, because then they can show up as the savior in a conflict. It can also pay off a lot of other nations via foreign aid. So are you of the mindset that a lot of these governments, especially the wealthier ones, are they going to walk away from fiat to this new money system?
I think they're resisting that, but I think certain governments are resisting it more than others. And the way it appears to us is that it's the Western governments who've actually benefited the most from the fiat system and have the dominant currencies. The G7, the EU, and the United States specifically have benefited the most, the United States the most, from having a fiat currency system, because the US dollar has been used since the Bretton Woods, agreement has been used as the world reserve currency. So not only have we benefited from being able to do things like sanction other foreign counterparties and push them outside of the system when we want them to politically do things that is in our, more in our interest. We've also we've experienced, we've owned the money printer, right? So whenever we wanted to bail ourselves out or do whatever, we could just go to the printer and print more and push it into the system. I think what we're seeing in the world and the geopolitical, different things going on is the the world is basically choking on the U.S. debt, and so much so they just can't take it anymore. It's unconscionable to sanction them and put them out of the SWIFT system and being able to have access to the currency. So you're seeing, Russia, China, it's the BRICS nations seem to be coalescing to come up with a new standard to, at least among themselves, be able to engage in international trade. As the West was seizing assets of Russian oligarchs and others who were more in line with Russia's political desires and geopolitical desires, I think you're just providing incentives for them to really have a strong alternative currency and stronger avenue to deal in trade.
So is it kind of a game theory situation where these sort of emerging market nations are going to just force the hand of the West?
That appears to me the way it's playing out. It appears that they are going, or in most cases have already gone back to a gold standard. And let's just, for your audience purposes, when I say gold standard, it's a euphemism for an asset-backed currency. So it's probably a basket of currencies. It's gold, oil, natural gas, maybe some of these other precious, metals and minerals like we talked about. But anyway, they've already moved back to a gold-backed currency standard, and I think I personally believe that there was already an arrangement that in lieu of a bona fide global conflict, like where people were getting drafted and sent to war in droves, that this macro issue has already been decided. And I think we as Americans were purposely held back from kind of going on to the standard because we were the furthest out of whack, since it had been our currency that was basically financing the world, and Americans lived through that benefit for so many years. We had to kind of, everybody else is just what we believe. Everybody else got to go first. And we are getting to the end of that period where basically for America to continue to participate in global trade, we're going to have to go back to the standard as well. We'll be like the last one to make it happen, but that's when everything will lock into place. And it'll be at that time that there's some type of a repricing of these commodities, maybe just a repricing of gold to what it really should be in order to support kind of everything, both assets and liabilities that are in the total system. It would be at that point that we think, XRP could really fill in its role. XL, maybe a few of the others could fill their roles of becoming, bridge currencies to these asset-backed digital currencies that are issued by governments or central banks of governments.
So there've been a lot of indicators that this is happening behind the scenes, and obviously in other countries. Do you think there's going to be like a day that we wake up and it's like, wow, the light flip, the switch has been flipped? Or do you think we're going to continue to sort of see this happen in like stages?
So I hope, and I've been hoping for a long time, that it would be a flip switching type moment. I think, unfortunately, if we can just say it plainly, we have a significant amount of corrupt people who are gatekeepers to that flip of the switch happening, because they are beneficiaries of the old system. Okay. They've been able to get away with things like money laundering, like committing crimes and getting away with this stuff that are materially lucrative transactions, but may not be morally or spiritually appropriate type things. So I think these people are effectively dragging out the time, and they until they come to their senses, or until they have lost the last bit of power. I think the timetable is going from a where it should happen like this, or even like singularity moment. It's just getting drug out over time.
So,
So you could see this switch flipping moment kind of being something more like there's a certain majority, a super majority of people that basically say, that's it, enough's enough, we're not contributing to that system anymore, and then it would break. It's probably something like that.
some people have speculated that Basel III rules, which are kind of around gold reserves being held by banks, could be that. Do you think that will play a role?
I think it does play. I think it's already playing a role. I think it's just. I think it's another. It's another domino, another chess piece, kind of moved into the ultimate departure from the old system and going into the new system, the transition into the new system.
Now, while returning to sound money sounds like a great idea, it's going to change a lot of things. I know in your business you do trading. How do you think this change to a new system would affect financial markets? Are credit cards going away? I mean, are loans going away?
Right. So so this is unprecedented in our lifetimes, but it's not unprecedented. It's actually the way things used to work in the past. In the past, when a lot of kind of the merchant rules and the laws that grew out of those merchant rules evolved, the money that was loaned was real money. It was hard money, and based on sound money, but they were post-paid debts. Okay, so what I mean by that is when like our families, if they were leaving the old world and coming across, to set up in the colonies, they probably were staked in some manner by investors who said, go over there and start to exploit the resources in the colonies and send those back. And here's a treasure chest of gold and silver, like real hard money. And we would have taken that and then gone and conducted our business activities and tried to create profits to send back and pay those loans off in hard money. Okay. But what turned out to be the case is we actually got out of whack over a period of, I think, a couple of 100 years of being in the colonies after having taken massive amounts of hard money. And then we didn't have the hard money to send back. And that's effectively what started leading us into this thing we call the United States, which was an attempt to incorporate and protect the assets that we had developed in the colonies. Now, this maybe doesn't apply to you. My ancestors, depending on which ones, didn't even come over till probably the 1700s, early 1800s. But for the real people who came here and actually started becoming colonists, and this is how it worked, right? So the money could still be lent, credit cards could still occur. You're just going to have to pay it back in some form of sound money. This is about to start happening. It's not. It maybe won't even hit it won't hit the consumers directly first, but as these countries, go back to sound hard money. So, for example, we've got contacts in Nigeria that they are going back to a gold money standard, like on January 15th. Like everybody's got to be in, because I think by the end of the month they're going to be back on the gold standard. Well, their money is going to become more valuable than the U.S. dollar. Like there's going to be more of a demand for a Nigerian gold-backed naira than there will be for the dollar. And so the relative value of those things are going to change. And if you think about how that's going to affect the credit type markets, if you're borrowing money in the gold backed naira, they're going to expect that they're paid back in a gold backed currency that they recognize and accept. They're not going to be taking that fiat dollar back unless it's, I mean, probably more than you can get your hands on until such time as, you know, the US were to go. But you're basically go back to get back to your question, go back to a postpaid debt system instead of what we're in now, which not a lot of people appreciate, is we're basically in a prepaid debt system that, you know, if you go back to 1933 when they confiscated the gold, they effectively had to write the balance sheet by our credit, right? The credit of each person that became a United States citizen.
So speaking of that time period, back in 1933, there was a very bizarre thing that happened for us, and that the US government forced citizens to sell gold. It's kind of hard to imagine that happening now. And that I know is part of the XRP buyback proposal that you've been working on. Do you feel like there would something similar could happen in the future as we kind of go through a monetary shift like they did back in the 30s?
You know, initially you're 100% correct. Back in 2021, the concern that what the government was up to was going to lead to that type of a taking was a big part of proposing the terms and the way we did. We think what's happening is that the disclosure of the corruption at the SEC, the failure to turn over the Hinman emails and things like that, is basically we're getting closer all the time to actually learning what the true story is, right? Instead of having to go through a taking and a repricing, which is what happened when they confiscated the gold back in the 30s. We still think what we're doing is valuable. That could happen. We think that the plan of the SEC, and we're not sure how high it goes, right? But it certainly looks like most of the SEC was engaged in a coordinated effort to try to just flat out steal it. That they knew that XRP was going to become some type of a financial standard in the new world, that it was going to take 10 years and maybe even a lawsuit that had to go to the Supreme Court, maybe, that it was going to be something that had to be tested legally over years and years and years. And they basically, they coordinated with other actors. It looks like JP Morgan's a big participant in all of this, to basically front run that process and try to just monopolize the new financial system before it had really even left the cradle or left the crib, or just flat out take the assets by manipulating the markets in a coordinated manner. And I think it's become obvious to those who've been watching this carefully over the past several years that this has been a very coordinated campaign to suppress the price of XRP and the adoption of the XRPL.
I know there's like ethical issues with that. Are there any legal issues? Like, is the government going to get into trouble if that becomes uncovered?
So you know, we live in a system now where I think basically, for all intents and purposes, all three branches of government have been captured into this banking system, right? So is it legal? Yes. Is it lawful? Probably not, because these are trespasses and takings of our property, that it's a taking without the determination of fair value. So it's a taking without payment of fair value, which in a constitutional government, our Fifth Amendment would prohibit that. The Fifth Amendment prohibits the taking by the government of assets from people and using those for public purpose without just compensation, which is effectively the payment of fair market value.
What's the difference between something being illegal and being unlawful?
That's an excellent question. So we have thousands and thousands and thousands of statutes, and people engage in millions and millions and millions of activities that effectively, if you didn't violate the statute or you didn't get caught, it could be legal, right? Or if you do get caught, but you go before a court that basically agrees with your defense, it's legal, right?
Okay.
Could be, it could be, sending money to Ukraine to launder it back through FTX could be legal, right? However, the people whose property was stolen in the enterprise, that was a bona fide unlawful thing according to like real law, natural law, biblical law, things like that. Okay. So when we think of things being lawful, you're really talking about more of a common law concept, which is I'll do no harm to Molly, she'll do no harm to me. And if I accidentally do some harm to Molly, well, then I'll make restitution to Molly for doing that. So okay. I won't trespass on Molly, won't trespass on her land. I won't take Molly's stuff without coming up with some agreement with Molly to pay her, fair compensation. That is a lawful type environment. Then you start to put on that what is basically the law of commerce, the law of merchants, and the way we deal in contracts and promissory notes and these types of things. Statutes, codes, and ordinances flow from that type of law. Those things are legal.
Interesting. As I'm not an attorney, so I never thought about those differences.
Well, most attorneys don't learn this in law school either, so you're not alone.
So speaking of the XRP buyback, first of all, it's just bizarre to me, the emotional reaction that people get when this topic comes up at times, which I just find strange. So if you are watching this and you feel triggered now that we brought this up, just like sit down. This is an interesting discussion because I think it goes far beyond what might appear to be the case at surface level. So one question that I know comes up a lot is, if hypothetically there were to be a situation in the future where a government or a bank were to buy back the asset at a much higher value, why wouldn't they just buy all of it right now when it's very cheap? Like, seems silly to not do that. What is your response to that question when that comes up?
So there's several reasons, but I think the most profound reason is that the only reason they would really want to do that is to, in the process of the transaction, establish a true fair market value. Okay, fair market value requires a few things. It requires, both parties not being in a position where they're compelled to sell. So, for example, if you and I want to buy your XRP, if I put a gun to your head and I say, sell me all your XRP or I'm going to blow your brains out, I'm compelling you to sell. You're basically entering that contract under duress. That's not an enforceable contract. Fair market value was not established, right? Likewise, if I know that I'm going to buy your XRP and that we are going to use it as the transformative asset of a new financial system, and that, within a year, 2 years, 3 years, we're going to dramatically increase the price based on a global coordinated effort that we've been engaged in for multiple years, and I don't inform you of that, then I've done the same thing. It's called fraud in the inducement. I'm in possession of material facts that, had you known that, you would not have sold it to me. Okay. So we've just talked earlier about all the different fraud and the coordinated FUD and the fact that this lawsuit has been brought, it's been delisted from this exchanges. You have all these media people going on to CNBC, Jim Cramer, you got Michael Saylor, all these people fudding XRP all the time. Now it seems like it's moved up to the Charles Hoskinson level and the Vitalik Buterin level, and this guy Craig White weighed in here, past couple of days and gotten an argument with David Schwartz, about stuff. So this is a massively coordinated campaign to basically keep people from adopting the asset. So it is a price suppression activity. What is on the exchange is not real. And that's where this is why I think people have so much cognitive dissonance about a high price, is because in order to basically start agreeing to the high price concept, and it doesn't even matter if it's $35,000, $50,000, $100, right? If you think that the price should be $100, you really start to have to question whether what you're looking at on the screen is real or not, which goes to the whole structure, is the whole system real or not? Okay. And the cognitive dissonance of not really wanting to know that it's kind of made up. But let's look at recent events. Okay. FTX had a balance sheet the week before they ultimately failed that they took out on a roadshow trying to basically get money in to save the firm. But they had two tokens on there, the FTT token and the Serum tokens, that had a combined value of over $5 billion. Those two assets on their balance sheet was worth over $5 billion. After the week played out, and we had the testimony and the review by the former Enron turnaround guy, is now the interim CEO, to take him through the bankruptcy. I think his name's John Ray. Those are being carried now for less than, I think, a combined value of $1 million. Okay.
Wow,
So at one point on an exchange, if you mark to market what those accounts were, they were 5 billion, and a week later it was under $1 million. So that's an example of it working the other way, right? And the only reason that we believed that those FTT tokens, Binance had a whole bunch of them. That's when Binance when Binance came to the conclusion that they aren't actually worth this. What did they do? They sold them all immediately and basically started the death spiral for FTX. Well, the same thing can basically happen in reverse. All these same people have been the ones who've been coming out against XRP for years. I don't understand what XRP is about. I just can't get it through my head. Well, I don't see what these people see in XRP. Yet they're going and buying, Luna and FTT tokens and Serum tokens and all these other tokens, right? I won't mention any others for fear of, causing some bank run on them. So look, markets are an amalgamation about, what a lot of big kids can put onto the market or take off to the market, okay, which in and of itself is a form of manipulation. But then the rest of it is basically media hype, media things that they can make you believe by going on CNBC and talking to all these pundits. And gosh, if they pull up Jay Clayton again to talk about, whatever, how anybody would trust anything this guy has to say after basically suing Ripple and walking out the door the next day and then going to work for crypto hedge funds and Apollo, I don't understand why people continue to kind of subscribe to this celebrity class of investors who really, we don't know anything about these people other than they're on TV all the time talking about investment opportunities. So
can you actually invest in any of these markets with confidence, knowing how manipulated they are?
Well, ironically, it may be, and I hope this is the case one day, that we come to learn that the lawsuit over Ripple during this time actually kind of, and the delisting of it put it in almost like a protected area, even though it was in timeout, and adoption has been slowed dramatically, certainly at the institutional level, which then trickles down to kind of the lower investor class or whatever. Adoption's been dramatically slowed during this period where there's been a cloud on title. But maybe at the end of everything, we're going to learn that, well, because it was off in this protected class, because Ripple had done so much disclosure with their quarterly reports and everything, and disclosing how much is coming out of the escrow and going back in every month, that transparency, while also kind of being held in timeout, will be one that we know, okay, this is, at least we know there's no fraud associated with it, right? A lot of the others, look, we've done extensive due diligence on Bitcoin mining firms and stuff, and people should be very concerned about Bitcoin. And I don't want to go into that as kind of off topic here, but once people truly start to understand who controls the mining capacity, where the money's going, how long the Bitcoin miners actually hold on to Bitcoin, and if they don't know, they should be asking those questions. We went and did the diligence. We've seen these facilities with our own eyes and talked to the executives and stuff. And we know what they're doing, and it's something that people should really be. I hope they've done that. And they're not, looking at a Michael Saylor who's telling you to mortgage your home and go, buy more Bitcoin, or a Max Kaiser who comes out and says, all there is Bitcoin. I control the politicians because I control the Bitcoin. These types of things. That's scary, scary stuff.
Do you think if we all knew the true identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, that would change anything for Bitcoin?
It certainly could. Apparently this Craig Wright gentleman comes out claiming he's Satoshi all the time. And based on this little spat he just had with David Schwartz on Twitter, I'd be concerned about that. Like, if he's really Satoshi, I'd be super concerned about that, because, allegedly Satoshi, whoever Satoshi is, had come out years and years and years ago and actually thought the Ripple project was a good project, thought the XRPL was a good project and doing something really good. So, is that person now kind of 180'd and saying something completely different? I think the reality is we've learned this from other disclosure. Our government knows who created Bitcoin. I think it's 4 individuals. There's 4 Satoshis. They know exactly who they are. I would think that the major institutional investors who have material Bitcoin holdings are under a fiduciary obligation to know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. I mean, are you really telling me that you can go make hundreds of millions and billion-dollar investments in an asset that you don't know who has created it, you don't know who controls that wallet, that they could do whatever they want to at any time, and you can look at your investors, in some cases pension funds, other major institutions, with a straight face and say you have no fiduciary obligation to know the truth behind that? I think that issue in and of itself either requires that they absolutely knew, or all of them should be fired immediately. I mean, it's like that.
I think we saw with Tornado Cash that the U.S. government too will not hesitate to label something for being sort of for terrorism or money laundering purposes. What if Satoshi turned out to be a North Korean hacker? I know people think that he's a native English speaker because of the white paper, but I don't know how conclusive that is. But the U.S. government could easily create trouble for Bitcoin if the identity was classified as someone who was a terrorist or drug dealer.
Or it's no big deal. Or he's a Silicon Valley Jedi genius, who can sit there and meditates, and he's a pure person who I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the case is. I know that the people who have the most of it now and the most mining capacity now are not him or her or them. Guess we got to know our pronouns. I think people should know. We would have to know. I mean, we went into Bitcoin. We were in Bitcoin for about 4 months, and did fine on it. But the more I learned about Bitcoin, the more I used Bitcoin to actually like send money around and stuff. It was like, this is a joke. Slow, energy intensive, expensive.
There's also a belief that one of the problems with this sort of crypto market is that we don't have clear regulations that apply to digital assets. I know Gary Gensler has spoken multiple times that he believes that the regulations are clear. Now, as someone with extensive securities background, if you were in charge of regulations, how would you define these assets?
Gary Gensler is trying to keep optionality to go shake down anybody in the sector and accuse them of securities violations. So it might be real clear. Remember, so that's legal. That's legal right now that he can go and do that. Okay. But may not be lawful.
Okay.
So this isn't hard to figure out. If it all comes down to, are you using the proceeds from your offering to basically develop the project or not? If you are like Ethereum, for example, and you actually went and pre-sold your tokens for Bitcoin to then go and invest those proceeds from the offering in developing your network and issuing your tokens, then your tokens are a security, right? You had some type of an option to acquire these, digital rights in the future. That's basically, it's a textbook security thing. If you created the project before the issuer issued anything, right? And these things existed, and you sold them and booked them as revenue, and just like any other product, because there was a utility and people could buy these tokens to use them to do something else, whether that be create their own projects using it, or send fiat money, or use it as a treasury function in their business or whatever, then those are not securities. Those are products. Those are commodities. There's something else. And I think that should be a very easily bright line to draw. And it's kind of shocking that no big law lawyer or regulatory person has leaned in to get those rules kind of written. Congress seems to be doing an abysmal job of doing this right now, with just, you've got the Loomis and Gillibrand Act, and they seem to have conversations with Gary Gensler and they go parrot whatever he says to the media. So that's, I would draw the line there. And then I would also, I think there is a place for the Hester Peirce safe harbor type of thing. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but she proposed years ago. I want to say she proposed the original one. It was either in 2018 or 2020. And then she kind of redid it. I think it was 2018. And I think she redid it in 2021. But effectively, it's a 3-year safe harbor. It's a very reasonable, like the way the securities laws used to work type regime, where you and I could come up with our own project, and then basically spend 3 years trying to get the adoption of the various governance systems and nodes substantially decentralized and spread out among the world, that there was no central third party actor anymore that truly controlled everything from a governance perspective. And she said we should have 3 years for that. And probably by the end of year 2, if you hadn't been successful in getting that done, you were basically starting to work with lawyers to draw up some type of registration for the securities that were out there that you were going to sell. And that seemed like a really reasonable kind of way to help transition everybody into this. I think in the future, we'll like what we want to do is actually have bona fide digital asset security. We want to issue tokenized securities. And because the rules are so unclear, we've spoken to the SEC and they've told us that they probably couldn't even get that through. And they're going to get twisted up in issues like, well, who's the transfer agent? What are the tax consequences of you being able to spend a tokenized, share of Amazon stock at the gas pump or something like that? It's like, well, these really aren't your concerns, your securities regulators. But anyway, we should be able to do bona fide securities offerings as tokens for tokenized securities and follow all the Section 5 regime of the Securities Act, do registration statements on them. It's just they're going to be in the form of an NFT, a tokenized security, and not in the form of, well, they're basically fiat digital now, right? For the most part, they're held in book entry form with the various brokers and transfer agents. But you should actually be able to have that security on your phone or your digital wallet, whatever that is, and you should be able to use that as value to spend on all kinds of stuff.
I mean, there's a belief that everything will be tokenized at some point, which I know everything is a very broad label, but that would obviously include things like stocks and bonds.
Correct.
So are we kind of held up with that because of this lack of organization in the government figuring out how to do that?
100%. Crypto Ari just did and I think I sent it to you, her video where Goldman Sachs was talking about they've got a whole team that's working on these NFTs as quote unquote financial instruments. That's what they're talking about. A security is something that is it really lends itself to being embodied in an NFT because they're, for the most part, once you set the terms in writing with either the trust indenture, the offering document, whatever it's going to be, that thing doesn't change, right? It is what it is. It's got the rights it has. It's got the votes it has. That type of thing is very kind of very just conceptually applicable to a blockchain digital, a truly NFT type environment. And I think that investment banks I think they're chomping at the bit to be issuing these things. Imagine the party that gets to do the first one. That's going to be freaking awesome, right? So I think the SEC is, but it's not just the SEC, because I do think in a strange way, it's kind of like it's almost all or nothing, right? Because of all the efficiency savings and because of the dramatic reduction in cost, dramatic reduction in friction in a tokenized kind of asset world versus kind of what we have now with middlemen and brokers and all this stuff. Once you have two major parties go over here, you hear this discussion a lot in the context of talking about atomic settlements, like is what PolySign wants to be doing, and that's where you can actually see what both parties have before you even transact. So there's no kind of concern about who goes first, type of a thing. But yeah, is we move into this tokenized world and more people, it's going to go really fast because you will immediately not be competitive with these other market participants. They'll be able to do it faster, cheaper, less people. And it's gonna, we think it's gonna sweep through everything. I mean, you're talking about whole like accounting offices and stuff just being brushed aside is redundant and unnecessary.
Yeah, there's a pilot project this past summer, Project Ion, that was testing settlement for assets for the DTCC. And it would essentially eliminate this entire back office group of people who are kind of admin, basic finance, sort of accounting types. That just goes away.
That's right. And as you start to think about that, you know, and you start to think about the accounting firms, and then the accountants are employed there, and the bankers, and just all this redundancy that's in the legacy system, you can start to understand why some people are kind of slow playing because they'll have to learn other skills and do other things. I think, you know, it probably pushes us more into a creator type economy generally. So there'll still be a need for, you know, creative type accounting people, creative finance people, creative deal makers. I think will be in very high demand. People who, you know, can kind of sit in both the old world and the new world, and it's going to be a great time, I believe, this transition into, you know, the truly digital economy, which is different from a digital fiat economy, right? I understand that we're just typing the number. The Fed's just kind of typing the numbers in now on the computer, and, you know, the new money shows up, and that's digital money as far as it's like a digital representation on a screen, but there's nothing behind it, you know. So this world we're talking about is where it's truly there are claims that you have on bona fide assets behind, you know, not that most people would ever make those claims, but you could.
This whole asset world of digital assets kind of connects to property rights, in that it's different how you would own things in this new kind of digital wallet world. So how would you explain what property rights means to somebody not really familiar with that in this context?
You know, one of the difficulties of going through this is it takes you back to the fundamental concepts. You almost have to go back to the beginning of how all this stuff kind of rises. And the property concepts we have in our kind of fiat system world is security collateralizing debts that are themselves, you know, debts for money that it's not really even a real offset of the thing that's collateralizing the loan, if that makes sense. So I think, you know, in some ways it's just kind of easier, you know, in a tokenized, I'm thinking about, you know, like homes and commercial buildings and things like that. The ownership of these things will be embodied instead of deeds that are recorded at the courthouse, and you know, that's kind of how you prove up who's got the superior title and all that types of stuff. You're talking about those same instruments being tokenized into an NFT and then recorded on a blockchain, and the ability for anybody to basically see the value of that, not only the value, but really to kind of KYC, AML, to due diligence. The true ownership of the thing can be done with computer access anywhere in the world. Things can be recorded by anybody anywhere in the world. You get into, I think the thing that's starting to take off on the property side is really kind of a fractionalized ownership of certain real estate assets, right? Crowdfunding your loans. You know, I had this amazing discussion. I had this opportunity to speak about a month ago at Princeton Business Today's international conference in New York, and it's so great to talk to the, you know, like the college age kids now, because they're so far beyond on this stuff. They're completely comfortable with it. It's not the same kind of resistance that people our age and older kind of have, because we're still attached, you know, to the old system. To them, it's a clean slate, and it's just easier and more efficient. But one of the persons had this great idea. It was a woman had this amazing idea to basically be crowdfunding student loans, and kind of getting these micro loans, but from a crowdfunding basis. And it's basically just kind of, if you think about it, it's instead of directing our credit to the Fed and using our credit to basically support the Fed and a centralized money printing, money, distributing entity, more kind of pointing it back at the people, and let's kind of help everybody out. And so you get into all these interesting issues about, okay, let's say there's a foreign student that wants to go to, Harvard and, take out student loans or something. How does that person may actually have exceptional credit, the way we think of credit in their world, but when they come over to the United States, it's like they don't exist, because they don't have a social security number and all this kind of stuff. So we get at this, how do you track credit country to country? All these types of things. Blockchain could be helping out with that as well. Anyway, I think all these new financial ways of financing things and starting up companies and the way people get access to loans is, really could change substantially.
I actually hope for future students that moving away from this fiat loan system will lower the price of college, because it's just so ridiculously expensive relative to the quality that you sometimes get. That I don't think they would be able to charge what they do if there wasn't a loan system there to enable that.
100%. I think the course, that's the poster child of what you're talking about is like a course in entrepreneurship, in college. Like that's something that could not have existed when you actually had to really pay, something that only with government-backed student loans that are being blown into these systems and dramatically increasing the cost of this stuff. That's increasing what the professors are getting paid, but then they're coming up with all this new, stuff to get people to come in. If you want to be an entrepreneur, the way you don't go to college and study it, you go into the market and do it, right? Elon Musk could, I'm certainly give us a master class on what it takes to be an entrepreneur.
There's very little job training at university. A lot of it is totally impractical, art history, gender studies, things that are not going to serve you in a work environment at all. And there's also a ton of building of like infrastructure at universities with this money, like very fancy gyms and stadiums. And I get sports brings in money for some schools, but there are fiat buildings essentially being created unnecessarily because of the loan money. Like, I think it sucks for some kid to have to be $200,000 in debt so that a university could build a fancier house for the president of the university. Like, it just seems kind of
I agree. I think there used to be a big differentiating factor between institutions. Some institutions were better than others, and therefore they should have been able, just on a competitive level, to charge more. I think with the internet and the pervasiveness and the ease to access information now, that's just not the case. But to your point about how you come out of college in some cases woefully unprepared, I went to 3 years of law school and came out of that. I didn't even know how to file articles of incorporation. I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. And it's like really the most basic fundamental thing that you would have to do. I knew a lot about corporate, judge law. I knew about the business judgment rule, and I knew about, I knew what the merger statute said and things like that. I knew what the articles of incorporation statute said. I didn't know how to do it. When somebody said, okay, go do it, I didn't know, you take them down to the Secretary of State and you file a document. So that's all stuff you had to learn kind of in practice.
I did want to ask you a question about the Fed. So that you and I talked about this a couple of days ago. This news that came out actually a couple of years ago that is not widely known at all. Well, first, many people don't know that the Fed is actually a private corporation. It's not an official part of the government. But during the CARES Act implementation, or whenever the CARES Act went into place, which I think was 2020, the Fed
was part of the movie.
rolled into the
response.
treasury. So can you talk a little bit about what that means?
I can try.
Okay.
I'm aware of it almost to the level that you just said it.
Okay.
That apparently at that time there was some type of merger of the two institutions. The implications of that is that the government that's like part of our actual republic of the United States has once again asserted itself over the constitutional money printing, developing that is in our Constitution, which is I think it's Article 2, Section A. It's part of the Congress's authority to coin money and regulate the weights and measures thereof. That's what we refer to as constitutional money. That's what we had in this country up until around the Civil War, when that kind of concept started to get eroded into moving slowly into what we have now, the fiat money system. So, I think the Fed is still printing this fiat money. It may be that they have been, they have been instructed to effectively destroy the dollar because we're waiting to once the demand for the dollar, drops so significantly that we have to basically answer our foreign commercial parties with a asset-backed currency, a gold-backed currency. We talked about the switch flipping or however that's going to occur. At that point, that becomes a treasury issued function, that these new notes that you're seeing here would be they'd be issued by our treasury. The Fed would effectively be out of business. We just wind it down. It's just a corporate entity that we'd wind down.
Now, I read something a couple of years ago that was very difficult to verify because I think history that you are taught in school can be a little bit misleading at times. So you mentioned Civil War era. Something I read a couple of years ago was that in 1871, after the Civil War, the U.S. was bankrupt. So it essentially was converted from a traditional government like we would think of it to a corporation, which would mean this Fed thing was kind of an M&A, right? Where you had two companies sort of merge in essence. That's kind of hard to believe, like that what I believe to be my government my whole life may not be the case.
I think instead of thinking about it as a merger, I'm almost thinking about it as a spinoff. I think initially in the initial years, up until the Federal Reserve Act, so now we're talking about the Jekyll Island, passing, putting the Federal Reserve Act in front of congresspersons, which happened, I think, 1910, 1911. Before that, I think you basically had a separation or an outsourcing of that constitutional money function to effectively a third-party corporation, call it a money service provider, that ultimately grew into the Fed. We had a few, we had some panics and some bank runs that occurred post-Civil War, kind of during the Reconstruction period, where throughout those those kind of boom and bust processes, the bankers were, I'm talking at the highest level, bankers were ceding more and more control because they were loaning more and more value in order to make things happen. They really perfected it kind of this 1910 to 1933 time period, where you had the Jekyll Island meeting. That becomes the bona fide Federal Reserve, this thing with the district banks that are all owned and controlled by people. In most cases, I think they're all outside the United States. They're not even Americans that control this money printing process. I've heard ultimately, as you go up the chain, there's City of London that has ownership. There's the Vatican's had some ownership. It's these types of entities that ultimately control control our Fed. But yeah, it was kind of like it was spun out and outsourced to a third party.
Okay.
And then we're fully within the fiat money system, which is all you and I have known, all of our lives.
So let's say that the Fed now no longer exists as a third party. We have sort of two things that could happen, right? One is we no longer have a central bank who can serve in the capacity of lender of last resort. Or maybe there's going to be a new central bank. And this is something I've seen tossed around. I'm just curious your opinion on it. Do you think Ripple could be a central bank for the United States, and that is the function of the escrow, is to provide this liquidity that you would need to have as a central bank to bail people out in the event something happened?
Could be. I've heard that too. I've heard that PolySign could also be that custodial situation. But Ripple does have the escrow. The escrow doesn't work like the board of governors to the Fed does now, right? The escrow is not people who get together and basically yay or nay based on the economic factors they see before them, whether to raise interest rates or reduce interest rates, buy up securities, whatever they're going to do. Whereas the escrow is cryptographically published and has it has a very set timetable. In fact, I was looking at that before this call. XRP Arcade has an excellent, he or she basically has all the releases from escrow, and then how much went out, how much went back in every month. And so we've actually gone through 58 months of the escrow since the public. It initially was supposed to be, it was set for 55 months, right? So we've already kind of crossed the initial term, and the money that went back in, or the XRP that went back in, was then published to a new contract that went another 55 months, or a new escrow term. So at this point, we've kind of gone three by. So that 58 months, that would have been 58 billion came out. 47.3 billion of the 58 has gone back in. So there's only been a net release of 10.7 billion from escrow in the whole 58 months. That's an average release per month of 184 million, 184.4 million, almost 0.5 of XRP a month. At that rate, from the beginning to get it all out would take, according to this chart I got here, 25 years at that rate. And the current pace, let's see. Yeah, so it's accelerated a little bit of what's remaining. So we've already had the 5 years have gone by, right? Of what's remaining in escrow at the average rate of what's come out the whole time. It's about another 20 years till everything would be completely dispersed. Now it goes up and down. It seems when it changes, it's gone for a period of 6 to 7 months, something like that. I'm looking here. For the past 4 months since July, it's 300 million has been going out. Before that, it was 200 for about 6-7 months, and before that, it was 900, 200. Sorry, 100, 200. That was actually coming out of it.
So, what's your take on the purpose of that escrow? Like, why was that set up?
I think they were dealing with a lot of real criticism about what their monetary policy was. Okay. And so they said, and this, hey, you guys have the 58 billion or whatever it is in in your holdings that you could dump on the market at any time. And I think that overhang was a real problem in the marketplace. So I think in December of 2017 is when they December 2017 is when they created it. The first month that we have data of what came out was January 18, which also happens to correspond the last time it kind of really went high, right? That's right around the time it had its all-time high. So I think that was a way to publish a monetary policy that doesn't rely on people. It's they decided it. Everybody knows what the rules are. We can all, it would take more than 80% of the nodes, right, to unwind it. I don't think Ripple could unwind it on their own. So that's the monetary policy of this lender of last resort, central bank, thing, whatever you want to call it.
Now, knowing sort of what we talked about earlier, that we're seeing this movement towards asset-backed currencies, there will likely be many currencies throughout the world. Different nations will have their own. What role does XRP have when we have all these other currencies? Like, what do we need XRP for?
So XRP is to serve as the neutral bridge asset, right? So the way you got to think about this is that it's really not that much different the way currencies work now, but we have networks of paper, right? It's the US dollars, the digital yuan, the ruble, the pound. We have all these networks of paper that are also not interoperable. They can't really be exchanged in a one-for-one type. So you have to have an agent who basically makes that happen. And they do that through this holding, certain people bank enough of the different currency in order to be able to facilitate to make that market, right? So these are currency exchangers, nostro vostro accounts. That's kind of what happens. So what I think everybody appreciates at this point, that's kind of lost value in the system. That's based the friction of our system and the requirement to physically hold these things in order to, or even digitally hold them, to make them have a transaction is an illiquid, inefficient process. So if you could actually have and the other thing is the Triffin Dilemma, which plays into this, in case your audience isn't familiar with that term, there's this natural conflict about having a nation's currency also serve as the world reserve currency. Because basically at some point in time, and I think we're seeing this very clearly now, your legitimate international interests and what you want other people to do, and using your political, in some cases military power, to make people do things internationally, sometimes is bad for your people at home. And the opposite is also true. If you do things that are good for the people at home, you end up giving up, ceding some power on the geopolitical stage that you otherwise wouldn't want to do. So that kind of inherent conflict is called the Triffin Dilemma. And so I think that's another reason why, if you could have a go-between that was always able to flip one to the other, if we had a supranational currency that everybody could agree to and agree what the value was, it would be a more efficient and would provide more liquidity generally. You could basically have each country could always deal in their own currency. And all they need to hold, they don't need to hold dollar, rubles, francs, blah, 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 right? They just need to hold this one other thing, the supranational currency. So that's the way ESDRs are proposed to work in the fiat world, okay? Now we're in the digital world. And so in the digital world, these fiat things become CBDCs. Let's still just say it's digital. We're not going to the asset back yet. It's just digital, right? So now you've got a network, a USD network, and a Chinese yuan network that have no ability to communicate to each other because the programming and the standards are completely different for how these two networks work, right? who's in control of them. So you need something to be able to take that value, transport it to the other network, and it'll interoperate. It'll basically be your connection, your pipeline connection to the other thing. So you can take this one, flip it into the other thing. And that's the importance of XRP kind of moving into this new world.
That's awesome. I think it will totally change the role of the U.S. military globally, hopefully in a good way. We won't have to be the cop on the beat in every country enforcing our political agenda.
That is what is leading these other countries to go away from the dollar now. Their people want to have sovereignty and be free and do have they want to live the way that their culture supports them living. And if you can be cut off from the financial system because of a geopolitical disagreement, that's not a system that you can participate in for a long time. You just can't. So you have to find a way around. I think the sanctioning, the role that we've played geopolitically for really the past probably at least 20 to 30 years, but maybe even 50 years, has that cop on the beat type of thing. It's probably not needed any longer, and it's certainly not desired. And that's why we've got a lot of people, a lot of other countries that are wanting to kind of go their own way.
Do you think that's going to be a problem for Ripple and XRP, that it's considered to be an American? I know, at least obviously Ripple's an American company. The exchange that they created is American run. XRP could be construed an American created asset. Is that going to be a problem for countries like Russia and China potentially to use those for their own trading?
I don't think so, because I don't think they have a problem with the tech being developed by Americans. I actually think American technology developers and companies that I think we've got among the best, the most elite in the world. I think other countries recognize that, and I think they like that. I don't think they think that's an issue. I think the issue is more that the current financial system is more kind of captured by the political class, and so it's driven on the political winds of the time, and it's not truly just kind of neutral. It's not Swiss enough, I guess. And I think they're fine with it's not just going to be Ripple. We'll see what happens with the escrow. I think, again, in order to kind of change the monetary policy, I think you're going to need nodes that are all over the world to come to an agreement to do that. So I don't really see that changing absent some really major thing. So I don't think, because it's kind of set in stone cryptographically, I don't think people are very concerned about Ripple kind of being American and therefore governing the XRPL in a manner that would be adverse to another country, sovereign country.
Okay, good. So I know a couple of weeks ago you launched a new committee that was sort of a second iteration of the XRP buyback work you did a couple of years ago.
It's been about
Thank
a month
you for
now.
including me in it. It's been pretty cool so far. What is
Cool.
the goal of this committee, and what is the outcome that you would like to see happen?
We have a lot more information now than we had back in 2021.
Okay.
The things we've been talking about on this podcast here were not known by most people. So most people didn't know the Federal Reserve was a private corporation back in 2021. That concept there was cognitive dissonance just on these base building level things. They certainly couldn't have wrapped their heads around that the markets might be manipulated or that the SEC may intentionally be trying to slow the adoption of the XRPL, right? These are just things they could never have even. But now we've had the 18, in fact, I think it's more like 20, it's like 20 months of the main dispute in the case has been whether the SEC is going to disclose the Hinman emails and the drafts of the speech and what the various lawyers at the SEC, their input into how the Ethereum speech, free pass speech came to pass. They don't want to disclose that at all. Okay. Well, that obviously has a bunch of people correctly speculating that there was something very amiss at the SEC, kind of as an institution, not just a few bad actors. This was pervasive among and known among most people at the SEC. That has become more of a common knowledge thing at this point in time. With the FTX collapse has occurred, and the exposure of how things like money that went to Ukraine somehow ended up being invested in and through FTX. And then we've learned that there was a lot of those dollars that somehow found their ways into politicians in America's pocket on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, that the connections of Sam Bankman-Fried's parents into very high political lobbyists is extensive. That Gary Gensler, the chairman of the SEC, was frequently meeting with Sam Bankman-Fried and that Sam Bankman-Fried's general counsel was the lawyer for Gary Gensler. I think they're at the CFTC together. All these connections now are known, and we're learning almost on a daily basis even more. The media's kind of willful ignorance and willful blindness about, most of them haven't even covered this case. It's like, this is the case is the most substantial legal matter or regulatory matter in the digital asset space. And most of them haven't even talked about it. Most common people who aren't just living this all the time are completely unaware this is even happening. Okay. All that's now known. And so I think we can get past some of these, like, why would they want to do this? This is actually the type of thing that could really, if people were reasonable and had cool heads, they would see this is actually a path out of a very, very bad situation for a lot of people. So it just felt like it was time to kind of reconstitute the committee, bring a lot more people in. I think last year we were about 20, we were a little over 20 people. We have 46 now. So it's like double the size. There's a lot of influencers, a lot of people who basically spend every waking hour researching this stuff and learning about all these different things that are happening geopolitically, who can provide input, their own experience. We have at least 3 bankers now as part of the committee, several lawyers, including some big law lawyers who are part of this. These are people who a year ago would have been kind of, would you talk about Willis type, thing when you asked them about it or tried to get them to participate. So the whole body language in the marketplace is completely different than it was last year. We've got these 2 subcommittees that are drilling down deeper. I think it's going to provide, I've talked to John Deaton, for example, who's a friend. I love him to pieces. He's been an amazing patriot and hero for kind of common everyday folks who've been substantially harmed by our government and what he's done. And he's basically done it on his own back for no money, but he's got a class of 75,000 people from all over the world who at some point at the end of this tragedy are going to need to be made whole based on what happened. Because when we know it all, and it's all going to, the truth is all going to be revealed eventually. And that may take another year, may take 5 years. I don't think it's going to take as long as, say, learning that the CIA was involved in the Kennedy assassination. But, it's going to, in some number of years, we're going to learn how significant our government's involvement in the suppression and the FUD process was. And at that point, he's going to need a damages model, right? We're going to need to know what the fair market value of XRP truly could have been. It may not even be that it'll be able to be realized anymore because of these 2 years were basically taken away from people, right? We had $15 billion in market cap went away the first day. So, you basically hit the pause button on the project for America for, 24 months now. We're talking significant damages. We want to actually have a tried and true defensible valuation that assumes basically one major thing. If that lawsuit wouldn't have happened, if the regulatory capture would not have occurred, and it was free to just go on its way and be adopted and achieve its ultimate intended use case, which is to transfer all the value in a tokenized world, what is the present value of that number? And have several different models in a football field, just like if you were selling a company or selling a bunch of oil or something, people will go through these exact same type of analysis. It's an asset, just like any other asset. We're going to put a value on that. And then when the lawsuit happens, once people are certainly outraged enough that they realize what Gensler, Clayton, Hinman, and all these cast characters, A16Z and Galaxy Digital and Multicoin and on and on and on, once we realize how pervasive this fraud was, they're going to want a big number because they'll realize how substantial it really was. And that's what it's going to be. And that's what will be going in front of the judge when they ask, well, what's your proof of the damages? Here's a valuation model that was done in 2022. Maybe this is a case at the end of 2023. Maybe it's 24 or whatever. Here's another one that was done in 2021. So we've got that valuation subcommittee. The other one subcommittee that we formed is the technology implementation subcommittee that is really getting into kind of the weeds about how, from a technological standpoint, there's a liquidating trust concept in there that there's basically a third party that would take the consideration from whoever the buyer becomes and hold that for disbursement to the participants that actually tender their XRP into the deal. So we're talking we've got in the term sheet right now, someone like a PolySign, somebody like, that's multinational, like a JP Morgan have to stand in and be that trustee. But how is it going to happen? So how is that escrow mechanic going to be set up? What blockchain are we going to publish that to? When someone tenders it, if the deal's not closing till next Thursday and then it's Monday of this week and they're tendering in, how do we preserve what they put in such that if the deal doesn't happen, they get their XRP back, or, if it does happen and it does close, they actually get paid the consideration that they're entitled to under the terms of the transaction. So we have some people, I think you've interviewed a couple of these guys, maybe, you just don't know who they are, who are on the committee and they're digging into it. I mentioned this in this Ray Fuentes video that we did last week, that we would probably then take that out to bid. People, I don't know, because they like poking fun at me, I guess. There's like, oh, that's real funny, oh, you're going to take it to JP Morgan and give them the tech. That's not what's happening at all. We'll put them through a competitive process to determine who we think should be the best party to serve as the liquidating agent. because that party is going to make sick fees in doing it, right? This is the most material M&A transaction ever to occur in the history of the world. And this institution will forevermore be thought of by, certainly the XRP community as a bona fide trusted institution, and probably end up being their banking institution, their custodian of what they receive in the deal going forward. So it's a big thing. And anyway, that's pieces of it. There's a lot of other things. We've got damages element put into it now. We've got we have fees that would go to certain cooperating parties within the government that can facilitate making the transaction happen. And because this, it's like Hillary Clinton said, it's going to take a village to pull it off, but that's what we're working on.
I told someone else this, but I think you're playing chess in a world of people playing checkers, and they're just unaware about how forward thinking you are about this particular topic. If you're watching this and you sort of have this, you've made assumptions about what this XRP buyback project is about, just expand your thinking a little bit. It's much bigger.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yeah. So Jimmy, you're absolutely a forward thinker with incredible knowledge about sort of the law and securities and investing. So how can people kind of keep on top of what you're working on and the things going on in your mind?
Well, be patient with this new committee process. I think it's going to take a couple of months to get everyone to where we feel like we've gone through a process that we've identified the proper counterparties. Counterparties are evolving, as you know. It's probably not going to be the Fed anymore. Fed probably couldn't pay for it even if right, they don't have any assets. It could probably be the Treasury as a participant, but maybe it's the World Bank and the IMF need to be a part of that. So be patient with us. We got a lot to think through. The best thing they could do is actually to engage with the political class and say, this is the thing that you need to be looking to do. Because it's really, we need a dance partner to truly move forward and dance with the XRP community and get something done, right? And right now, the current political class seems to have very little desire to actually learn anything about this new blockchain technology and how it's going to work and all this stuff. So we need people to start dancing and start actually being someone on the other side of the table, because we want something that's going to work for everybody. It's going to work for them as well. But that takes somebody else.
So you're suggesting people engage with the kind of Congress people and senators and even local government?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's get the term sheet in front of local government. Let's get in front of our representatives and our senators, so that they have something to start thinking about how to transition into this next thing. We've already got a lot of these components are falling in place. Representative Mooney, as you know, has put forth a return to the gold standard again. I think as I was preparing for the call, I found that he had done it once in 2018 already. And it's just kind of set there languishing. Congress isn't acting on that, but there's components of this that are already kind of circulating in Congress that could really all come together if everyone just kind of gets oriented and thinking about this in the right way. And I think on the other side of this is a truly beautiful time for Americans and the world. It's an end of conflict. It's people can engage with any other person peer-to-peer with real assets on a level playing field anywhere else in the world. I see the future is very, very bright. I think the future that they were trying to give us from the central bank and the government kind of oligarchy was going to be dark, and I think we've made it beyond that. Now let's construct a truly beautiful future together.
So I don't have to own nothing and be happy about it?
Amen.
Well, thank you very much. This was incredible. We covered a lot of things. I really appreciate Jimmy taking the time to speak with me about this stuff.
Bet. I enjoyed it, Molly. Thanks for having me.